Morning, dear friends. Welcome. Thank you for being here on a Wednesday, the 25th of Tavis, the 29th of December, final days of 2021. But we're deep into 5782, and that's what is supremely relevant to a Torah class for sure. But in as much as the streets are busy and the buildings maybe are busy, and admittedly that introduces extra complexity. But we'll take this moment to dive into the Talmud and to forget about the rest of reality. We are studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently, Masechet Shabbos, Perek Asiri, chapter 10, Perek HaMatzniah. We are on 95a, and we're now talking more broadly about a series of different activities that, although are not immediately found in the Mishkan, are restricted from Jewish practice. And we have a machlokes in a number of them if the prohibition is biblical in nature. In other words, are they really part of the 39 malachis and their offshoots, their toldot, which are all considered biblically binding, or are they simply rabbinic in nature? Have the Chazal restricted them because of a comparison, but are they not part of the fundamental biblical restriction? We were introduced to an interesting text that described certain activities and the opinion who says that those behaviors are prohibited mid-oraita, meaning they are biblically problematic, which in other words, they are real, full-scale melacha. So it says that they are, if you do it b'shogeg, you have to bring a chatos. That's very familiar. On Shabbos, if you do a prohibited act, you desecrate Shabbos inadvertently. So then the act, which is a shogeg, warrants a chatos, a sin offering. But then we were introduced to something we have not yet seen in our text, and there's a reason for it, which says, Ubiyontif, b'mezid, if this action was done on Yontif intentionally, well, then the person would get malchus. Our dear friend Rebella, are you on? You know, there's someone pulling a prank. Oh, okay. Because I thought there's someone pulling a prank every time someone asks a good question. They get a phone call. So I thought they were doing the same thing to your doctor. You're also muted. So I thought maybe they were doing that to Rebero too. So Rebero, you asked Malchus. We've never heard this word Malchus and Yontif. How does this fall in over here? And it's a good question. But let's understand what the comment was. Basically, although for the most part, the melachis that are problematic on Shabbos are restricted on Shabbos, are restricted on Yontif, with a big exception. All melachis that are connected to food preparation or production, which is permitted on Yontif with many restrictions, but it is permitted. But there's another big difference, and the difference is the penalty for intentionally desecrating Yontif. Now, just because the penalty varies, that is not to say that it is something that we should do or it is less severe, but it happens to be that the penalty is different. So I want to show you, and we'll do what is a very smart cheat. We'll take a look at the Rambam, who codifies Hilchos Yontif. Hilchos Shvisas Yontif, the laws of how one is obligated to rest on Yontif. And so I want to show you a little bit of the Rambam's text, Rebero, just so we have some clarity and understand why the halacha is as it was presented in the Gemara. So let's take a fast read, and then we'll look into the Gemara, and I think it'll make a lot more sense. And Rebero, I want to thank you for your indulgence as we avoided doing this yesterday, but I think this now is the appropriate time to do so.
I didn't see any indulgence.
Well, now, any act that is culpable. Well, the indulgence was that we didn't provide what you were asking for. Any act that is culpable on the Shabbos is punishable with lashes if committed on a Yontif. Right? Kol malacha shachayavin alav b'Shabbos imasa isa b'Yontif. It was committed on Yontif. Shaloi l'tzorech achila, and it was not for food preparation. Like one could receive, or one does receive, lashes. Chutz min ha'itza, with the exception of carrying, rishus l'rishus v'avara, with the exceptions of carrying and fire. Being that you're allowed to carry on Yontif for food, you're also allowed to carry more generally. And this is the good news. This is why on Yontif you can carry your talis to shul, You might be able to carry your keys without any complications. You could take your bendel off, your belt, your Shabbos belt.
People smoke cigarettes.
Yeah, so that's the two things: carrying and fire. Therefore, you can carry a kid, or Sefer Torah, or a Torah, or a mafteach, or a key, and other necessary and important things. Mirshus l'shus. You can also light a fire with restrictions, even though it actually is not immediately for food. All other malachas too, which are necessary for food preparation, mutar, are allowed. So, for example, shchita vafia, you're allowed to slaughter an animal on yontif for food. Afia, you're allowed to bake. Velisha, you're allowed to knead. But in activity, a malacha that is not facilitate food at all, kigain ksiva, writing, has nothing to do with the food preparation. I mean, you'll tell me you need to write down a recipe, but that's too far removed. The arigo, weaving, preparing ubinian. So here, again, I'm sure when we'll go to the Gemara and we'll learn the Gemara, Chagiga and elsewhere that talks about the laws of Yontif, maybe we'll find that not everyone agrees 1,000,000% with what the Rambam says, but the Rambam is always an amazing resource if we want to get a general overview and a picture of how Yontif works. And so here we have the fact on Shabbos, it's a malacha, and if you do it inadvertently, you have to bring a chatos, and if you do it, but on Yontif, it's the consequences are different.
But still, Rabbi, isn't it? I don't want to belabor the point, but isn't it a little strange that all the other things we discussed, nobody ever says anything about Yontif?
So I'll explain to you. Well, it's a good question. So I'll explain to you in the next step. First of all, we're studying Masechah Shabbos, and this is the primary space where we discuss the malachas. So at this point, we're really viewing the malachas through the paradigm, through the model, and through all of the halachas of Shabbos. That's the entirety of our discussion. Yontif always plays second fiddle. Yontif is always, how is Yontif different? That's almost always how the conversation goes. But there is an important distinction, because what kind of crime, what kind of avera that a person wishes to atone for inadvertently doing, do you bring a chatas? Only if the intentional consequences are super severe, a death penalty, or kar is possible. Desecrating Shabbos intentionally with asra, with the right circumstances, could lead to skila, to stoning. And so only a malacha that has the extreme consequences for being done intentionally warrants a chatas unintentional. For the same reason, Shabbos, you don't get malchus for desecrating Shabbos. And Yontif, you do. You know why you don't get malchus for desecrating Shabbos? Because the consequence is a whole lot bigger. And so for some reason, the way this brisa is formulated is to show us the two unique, or to give us the two unique consequences. And therefore, Rabbi, it's phrased, as we saw.
Yeah, but
like this.
Rabbi, for instance, we had the thing about carrying some little thing with spices. So if a person on Yontif would say, I'm taking those spices to season my food,
yeah,
he would get away with it, or whatever.
He would be not only get away with it, it's good. He should do it. It's part of Yontif observance. So it's not a heter. When a person walks into the shul with a talis or their key, it's not like they got away with murder. No, they actually did a mitzvah. They were part of Yontif observance. Part of Yontif observance is you can prepare food, you can carry. I was almost going to say you can smoke a cigarette, but you shouldn't smoke a cigarette. But if you go around, yeah. But anyways,
now we have these electronic cigarettes, all kinds of new shilas never existed.
So actually, that's actually a good shilah. Can you use an electronic cigarette? I'm fairly certain the answer on Shabbos and Yontif is no. And anyways, okay, let's leave it at that. Don't smoke. A person should certainly not smoke, and a person shouldn't start smoking. Anyways, so that's point one there, Beryl. That was your question. It was a good question. It was a good point.
Thank you.
I avoided it just because it doesn't touch upon the core definition of the malacha, but it's good to clarify, and I'm glad you asked it. And so I hope that clarifies things. So let's just take a fast look. So all of these activities, according to Rabbi Elazar, they are melacha. And if they are melacha, well, what are the two common things that could happen? Shagag b'Shabbos. If you make a mistake, if you do it unintentionally, chayev chatos, you have to bring a chatos. Hazid b'yantav, and if it was done intentionally, like arboim, you can get arboim, you get lashes. Would they actually get arboim? Would they get 40 or would they get 39? So we know they'd always get 39 lashes, which is something interesting and an interesting similarity to the 39 malachis, which are described as arboim chaser achas, 40 minus 1. But now there's something else that we need to discuss before we continue. And that's, I want to pull up our halacha resources to talk about the cheese making process as well as the sweeping process. So let's take a look in the Shulchan Aruch. Oh, and honey. So as you may recall, we said in the Gemara yesterday, and we're reviewing it now real fast, ch11, milking, separating the curds in the whey, and forming it into cheese, sweeping, spritzing water, and taking chalos dvash, taking honeycombs out of their source. These activities are prohibited, and according to Rabbi Eliezer, they are malacha. They're outright malacha. And then the Gemara discussed how they're malacha, if they're malacha, why they're malacha. Let's take a look at the text of the Code of Jewish Law, Rabbi Yosef Karo, along with the glosses of the Ramah, to see more or less how this idea is introduced into common day-to-day Jewish practice, or I should say Shabbos to Shabbos Jewish practice. First of all, asur lirdois dvash mihakaveres. One is restricted, prohibited from extracting, removing honey from the comb, from the hive. Pirish hakan, what is a kaveres? It is a kan, it is the nest, shadvarim oisim b'dvash. It's where the honey is produced. Mipnei shedoime litoilesh. It is similar to uprooting a growing item, something that grows on the ground. Now, granted, honeybees, they don't actually grow from the ground, but the way they fuse their honey combs, the way they fuse their nests is doime. By the way, the wording of the Shulchan Aruch makes me think that this is rabbinic, not biblical. Doime l'toilish still Chazal prohibited, and the Ramah adds, "V'dafke im devarim bekaveres." This is, I'm sorry, devukim bekaveres. This is only if the honeycomb is attached to the nest. But if you have chalois dvash, if you have a honeycomb that's detached, or it's been all crushed up, so the honey is no longer in those little, how do you call it? The way is the comb the individual, how do you call it? You have the nest, you have the beehive, and then you have the sections that are generally store honey. But then you have each little, what do you call it? Each little chamber, each little space where they put the honey. What do you call those little?
My Zeta didn't have bees.
Where's Alan?
He's in Allentown.
You know, bees.
Divider, maybe a divider.
Here, we'll find the picture, and then maybe we'll find the picture.
Only with drop label could you learn this.
Well, here, this is a picture of, this is a cross, a cut. So, you know, you have each of those little, how do you call it?
I didn't know they had a name.
I'm sure there's a name. Okay, it's Maya Maratzis. We'll get there. When Alan rejoins us, we'll have a lot of questions for him. So one of the interesting things that are important to know is that bees are very essential for agriculture. And bees are used to spread the pollen and to pollinize and to, how do you call it, to fertilize the different plants. And so bees are absolutely essential. And so farmers don't only raise bees for their honey, which is wonderful. And it's also a biblically recorded, nourishing, high calorie item, but it is also important for agriculture. And so in Israel, there's a lot of bees and the use of bees. Because, anyways, and I think there are also certain birds that are occasionally used in certain regions of the world, maybe in the old country. I think certain birds were also used for spreading pollen and for pollinating and fertilizing, or whatever the right terminology is, to cause plants to grow. But anyways, long story short, you cannot extract honey from a honeycomb. And again, I think the way we're portraying it here is more the way they happen in the wild, in nature, as opposed to most of the images we looked at, which were like, how do you call it? Professional grade honey beehives that we have those shelves that you can easily extract the honey and the like. But if it's already extracted, it's no longer in those little chambers, whatever the word for it is, then you're allowed to use it on Shabbos. Excuse me. Shulchan Aruch, well, it's another siman in Shulchan Aruch, but another issue that we discussed here in the Gemara. The question of sweeping. Can you sweep? So the Shulchan Aruch starts off with the following: Asur l'chabed habayis. One is prohibited from sweeping the home, elo imkein hakarka merutzaf, unless you're one of those rare homes that have flooring, unless the floor is tiled or stoned, it's finished. The Shulchan Aruch adds v'yesh matir afilu eina merutzaf. There are those dayas, there are those opinions connected to our Gemara that would say that you might even be allowed to sweep if your floor is not finished. V'yesh machmirim, the Rama adds that there are others who are machmir afilu b'merutzaf. Our Gemara, although it explains that the prohibition may have to do with hashvas gumais, filling in the holes, and therefore it could be connected to boina, there are still opinions that say we should be machmir. And who? Well, for example, the Torah and other very important halachas. Indeed, the Rama says the halacha in the Ashkenazic world in Poland, where he lived, is that we do not sweep ve'ein l'shanos, and you shouldn't change the minhag. Miyu ayidei akamoter, v'chein ayidei beged ay matlis like kanaf avos. Similarly, you could use a garment. Really? Hold on one second. Sorry, folks. Look in the broadcast. I must have posted it there. But the Rama says a standard broom you shouldn't use, but you can use a garment or a feather. Hakalim ve'eina mashva gumais. V'asu lechabed habegadim ayidei mechabdois hasuyis miksamim shelo yishtabro kismeim. But you shouldn't use other technologies, other types, other ways of sweeping. But for this, we're going to open up some more commentary here. Take a look. We want to see. So it's really a much more complicated subject, because sweeping, we said, might fill in a hole. Well, number one, it's not a guarantee that it's going to happen. Number two, Eina Miskaven, Dr. Hammer, the person that's sweeping, is not intending to smooth out their floor. They're simply trying to keep the dust settled and down, and and so in the Shulchan Aruch, where it says you're not allowed to sweep, the Magen Avram makes sure to reiterate v'yesh matirim, because davar she'eino miskaven, in as much as a hole might be filled up, it's not the intent, and it's also not a guarantee. It's not absolutely going to happen. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah here, who explains, and we did this yesterday. The maze is offer because you're moving earth around, you fill in holes. It's considered construction building. Even though he pushes back, because we just saw the Magen Avram says that there's a strong case to be made that you should be allowed to. The Mishnah Berurah quotes from earlier sources says it is a psik ratio. It is absolutely going to happen. The HM, are you sure you have the right link? Oh, okay, that's the right link. And then he says, you know what? Maybe once a person is allowed to sweep, they may come to end up intending. So that would be a little bit of the case, even though Eina Miskaven, being that it does happen, and you may end up getting worked up and into it and forget that you're not supposed to sweep, and therefore you shouldn't do so. Now, but that only is a problem if you have dust on the ground, if you don't have tiles. But if you have tiles on the floor, so you don't really have holes to fill up. And so therefore, there's a much stronger case to permit sweeping if you have flooring. But why would some opinions say that you still shouldn't? Some people say even if you have tile on your floor, you shouldn't sweep. So the Mishnah Berurah reminds us it's because what happens if you move into a new home and you don't have tiles? You'll become so accustomed to sweeping on Shabbos, you'll forget that you shouldn't sweep in an unfinished, untiled flooring. Kind of like the folks who carry with an Eruv, and then they come from Israel to the Chutz La'aretz, and they come to places where there are no Eruv, and they don't even think to ask because they're so accustomed to having an Eruv. So at this point, we're going to leave it as follows. There are opinions that say,
so according to
sweep.
that way of thinking, then you shouldn't allow carrying in a place where there's an Eruv also, because maybe then you'll forget when you get to a place without an Eruv. There's no end to it.
So maybe it's like because the whole idea of an Eruv is really possibly rabbinic, because you're only carrying in a Carmelis, you're not carrying in a Rosh Hashanah. But indeed, you're correct. That's why there are many that say you can't sweep, because there's tile, and even though you might forget, well, hopefully you won't. But the Mishnah Berurah was coming to explain the opinion that the Shulchan Aruch brings that says that you cannot sweep even in a tiled floor. Let's just do a little more.
Rabbi?
Yes, doctor.
Just the kavana issue in terms of, we're talking about dust, or we're talking about dirt, or I mean, there are different reasons that people might want to sweep, similar to different reasons why, if we make the analogy to the Shabbos tablecloth, when you want to take off crumbs from the tablecloth and how you're going to take them off before dessert, before benching, blah, blah, blah. So the question is, a lot of it has to do with kavanah, and I didn't hear that here at all. I heard about filling a hole, that it's dusty. It used to be only dirt, and it's different if you have tile or something else.
No, so kavana is on the table here.
Yeah.
But it enters the dialogue more in the analysis than in the essential presentation, because so when we're reading the text, it says you can't sweep. Why can't you sweep? Because you'll fill in a hole. But now we need to figure out, okay, when you're sweeping, you're not filling in holes for purposes of construction. As a matter of fact, you're probably not intending to fill them in at all. And for that reason, for starters, the Chachamim say for sure it's not going to be a biblical problem. Maybe the Chazal say you shouldn't do it because it's akin to sweeping. But now, even assuming that the Chazal restrict, there's a shvus that says that you're not allowed to sweep. But what are we talking about? And that's where the Shulchan Aruch and the earlier commentaries say, 1 second, this is only talking about a floor that's made of earth. It's dust, it's unfinished. There's no wood or there's no tiles. And therefore, you can be mashva gumot. You can end up filling in holes. Admittedly, it's not what you were intending to do, but it could happen. But a tiled floor, the whole issue doesn't begin. There is no issue of sweeping on a tiled floor because there's no holes to fill in. And yet, in the Shulchan Aruch, it brings a daya, it brings an opinion. I think it was the Torah who says that even then you cannot sweep. And so we explained the possible reason, because maybe you'll end up moving from a place that has flooring to not having flooring, and so we'll end up forgetting that that sweeping is prohibited. Now, why is the Brisa so? Why do I think the Brisa just says don't sweep? Because in the time of the Mishnah, the time of the Gemara, it appears most people, and we had this earlier on in the Gemara, most people did not have flooring, and therefore the default scenario where a person is sweeping is where there are holes in the ground. Rebel?
Rabbi, I don't know why we have to look for such a reason. Sweeping itself, in my mind, the effort and the way you do it is similar to so many agricultural activities, separating the plants, clearing in between, all kinds of stuff.
So that's an interesting question. I think, first of all, If you recall long ago, the Gemara said, if you dig a hole, it's a problem. I'm sorry, you fill in a hole, it's a problem. Or if you dig a hole, it's a problem. And the Gemara says, if it's outdoors, so then it's connected to agriculture. If it's indoors, you don't usually plant stuff indoors. So now the only problem could be boina. And that's exactly what our Gemara seems to be saying. It is something like boina. That's certainly what Rashi explains, that it's like boina. It's like you're filling in a hole. But if there's no chance for you to have a hole to fill in,
There was another problem always with dirt floors without tile. Besides sweeping, they would have to, from time to time, put water down because it would get dirty. So it would spray the earth with water.
yes,
So
that's the next malacha that our Gemara is talking about. Mechabed is sweeping, and mirabetz was to try to moisten it so that the earth doesn't fly around. Just give me one moment here.
Today you would have all kinds of problems. You have the Swifter, you have to take off the pad, tear a pad.
Yeah.
and
that's true.
also, the other comment I'd like to make is when it comes to, in case maybe he'll move into an area from a tiled floor to a non-tiled floor and he'll do it, that's the whole point of shogeg. He wouldn't do it on purpose. It does it by mistake. He may do it once and then realize that's the whole point of shogeg.
I'm sorry, I missed that. You're saying that
What I'm saying is when they said that you shouldn't sweep because maybe you'll move from a home with tile to a dirt floor, and he may do it there, that's the whole point of shogeg.
but the
That
Chachamim are
if you do it by
interested.
mistake, you may do it once.
Why
So
only once?
why-
If you grow up in a home where sweeping is permitted, and then you move to your wife's to your in-laws, and over there they don't have floors, and you're like, in my house I always
Believe me,
sweep.
my in-laws will tell me you can't do it on Shabbos.
There's also the danger if you're allowed to sweep, are you allowed to clean something? I see a
Also,
whole-
Beryl, that was the point that I didn't respond to. It sounds like when our Gemara, at least the way Rashi explains it, sweeping wasn't really about cleaning, right? Or it was, but it was about
not
settling.
the way I sweep anyway.
Well, yeah, but when we sweep on a tile floor, so then it's much more of an act of cleaning and collecting the items that you desire. And I thought, Rebero, you mentioned possibly a boiler kind of scenario where you're sorting between what you want and you don't want, but I don't think that's really how sweeping for the most part works. But anyways, okay, so that's what I wanted to do. We learned it in the Gemara, but I wanted us to see in the Shulchan Aruch. But you know what? Let's do one more thing. Let's take a fast. I know we don't always do this. But let's see the words of the Rambam. So the Rambam here, the whole halacha is a series of restrictions that might lead to hashva asgumais, to filling in holes. We don't start with sweeping, but let's go from the top. It seems like there was a time where it was a common adult kind of game where the people would play, women would play with nuts. It is prohibited to play such a game on Shabbos. Because as they're sitting and they're collecting, it's plausible that they'll come to smooth out a hole, and that would be a problem. Similarly, the asur lechabed, this is our point, esakarka, you cannot sweep, shema yashva gumais, because one may come to smooth out a hole, unless the floor was finished, it was tiled. And so here we have a solid psak from the Rambam that our whole Gemara that prohibits sweeping is about dirt floors. And most of the other primary poskim seem to agree, but not all. You're also allowed to spritz water on the ground. It is not at all your intention to fill in holes with water pouring on the ground. But you cannot smear the floor, you cannot coat the floor with oil or whatever, even if there were stones. The dirt floors shouldn't be washed or treated. But and also besides for the malacha issue, Rabberu, I think you made this point, maybe it was the doctor. A person shouldn't do the regular weekday maintenance of their floor because maybe you'll because if you become permitted, allowed to treat your floor in all manners of chol, you'll end up doing it even where the floor is not finished. But sweeping on a tile floor, that's okay. The other more extensive and exhaustive maintenance should be deferred till after Shabbos. This is the Rambam, the Rambam's teaching here. All right, I think that is it for the first. But you know what we didn't see at all? No one talked about cheese making. So let's see. Give me 1 second. Let's look up the cheese topic if anyone talks about it. Maybe it's a later Gemara. Here we go. Mutar loymar la'akom. This is just further on in the Shulchan Aruch. I want to also see. All right, we'll see at least some of it. Here is the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam. Hadosh kigageres chayiv. You're not allowed to thresh. This is connected to our Gemara that was asking what's wrong with milking, and the Gemara said it's mefarich. Mefarich means the extraction of the good from the inedible, which was connected to threshing. So the Rambam starts from the Av Malacha. Hadosh kigageres chayiv. You're not allowed to thresh. Ve'in disha ela b'gdulei karka, but really the biblical Av Malacha of disha, of threshing, is only if it grows in the ground. So anything that grows in the ground, then you're extracting the edible from the inedible. So if it's the kernel from the husk, or the grain from the husk, or the peas from the pod, or whatever, that could be considered dash. But the act of extracting edible from the inedible, Harei, he told us dash. This is an offshoot of dash. What would be a prime example? Milking a cow, or milking an animal, you're chayiv because of the act of mefarek, which is, according to the Rambam, clearly a tilda, a secondary malacha that's connected to mefarek. Similarly, if a person, for whatever reason, harms a living animal with the intention of extracting their blood for a purpose, which is shocking. Why would you do that? But chayiv mishum mefarek. Removing blood from a living animal is mefarek. But this is only if your intention is to actually use the blood. If it's just to harm the animal, well, then you're doing mekalkel, and then you are doing it's not a malacha biblically, anyways. And then the next halacha that we're quoted here, it's a few halachas later. He says also mechabetz, separating the curds and the whey. Again, we discussed this in the Gemara just to see in the Rambam. That's considered like boyer, separating good from bad. And then here, hamigave neslagvina, the Rambam paskins. The Rambam paskins. If you make cheese, Hariza told us boina, it's considered construction, it's building. The we have to build a certain amount. Why is cheese making considered boina? Who wants to just remind me? I hit mute all, but please unmute before we go back into the Gemara. Why would forming cheese be considered like boina? Please tell me, because I have a follow-up question I think you're going to appreciate.
You take different ingredients and you make something new out of it.
So the milk, when it separates, you have a bunch of separate curds, and then you push it all together to create some kind of blocker formation, or how do you call it? A wheel, whatever exactly, however you do it exactly. You're taking separate items and you're putting it together, and you're doing boina. Now, does everyone believe that making cheese is a boina de'oraisa? It's a biblical act of building? Does everyone believe that?
Hey, no, it's temporary.
The Chachamim say it's a Shavuos. The Chachamim say it's a rabbinic. So Reb Menachem gives a very good explanation. Why, Reb Menachem, do you feel more comfortable with the Chachamim's opinion, which is that cheese making is only derabanan, because you're saying it's not permanent? Well, is building only building if it's not permanent? We discussed that yesterday. But assuming that you don't accept Rabbi Menachem's opinion, let me ask you a question. If making cheese is boina, is crumbling cheese soiser? So that's a question that's asked out there. Let's do this fast, and then we have to do some new ground. I know we spent almost all of today reviewing the halacha that's connected to yesterday's Gemara. Shulchan Aruch. And here is the answer to the big question that I think Dr. Hammer asked yesterday. What do you do if your animal is due a milking and you can't milk it? And there's Sar Balichayim involved. What is the solution? Does the halacha care about the plight of the animal? Mutter loimer la'akum. One is not allowed to milk their own cow, but they can instruct a Gentile lachloi behemtoi b'Shabbos to milk the cow on Shabbos, mishum tsar balichayim, because of the pain the animal is going to otherwise experience. Shacholav mitzara, the milk before it's removed causes pain. However, v'acholav asar by bayayim, this milk is prohibited on Shabbos. Yesh Oimrim says the Shulchan Aruch shetzarich leknoisay min ha'akum b'davar muat. You would have to purchase it from the Gentile so that it doesn't have the appearance that he's milking it for you to have milk. So although usually you cannot tell a Gentile to do a malach, especially assuming that milking is not a biblical, actually no, I think it might, well, according to the opinion that says that milking is not a biblical prohibition, it is still prohibited, but certainly for the purpose of Tsar Balichayim, it is permitted. Now we're going to do this one more time. Let's open up and see some of the comments.
Quick one.
Yes.
So it's established that Tsar Balichayim is an issue. What if not everybody's in an area where there's akum around, where there's a goy around?
Well, you have to figure it out. If you have a farm, then you're probably ethically compelled to find a solution before you open the farm to.
Not everybody's got one cow, two cows. I mean,
Okay.
I mean, bottom line is that since we established that it's Tsar Balichayim and there's no akum around, are you permitted to choliv on Shabbos?
Are you allowed to what?
To milk.
You are not allowed. You, doctor, you and I, when we go into business together and open a dairy farm.
No. What I'm saying is if there's a situation.
So hold on, but I have an answer for you. You're gonna like this.
Okay.
The Magen Avram asks your question. What if you don't have a Gentile? Well, he doesn't ask like that. He says, "Huadin, the mutar." I'm sorry. Okay, not here, but the Magen Avram elsewhere, maybe it's a little further down, says B'chein, you can also, here. Mashma, Sham, in the text, there's more the Ileka Akum, if you don't have a Gentile, Shari, Alidei Shom Mishum Sar Balichayim. So there are opinions that say that even a Jew themselves can do it. The Toiv Lasei Salidei Katan, but you should ideally have a child do so. So this is the Tshuva Ramah. So the Ramah writes that it's possible that you could even have an adult milk the cow because of Sar Balichayim. Ideally, you want to have a child do so. So that's very interesting. So I hope we're feeling a little better about this facet of the halacha, that you might even be allowed to milk if you don't have a Gentile present. Just look at one more thing while we're here.
So when you milk it on Shabbos, let's say, are you permitted to milk it into a kli, or do you?
Oh, that's a good
shaila.
shaila.
To the ground, and then it's considered maybe.
So the Rambam says.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because by the Gentile, the indication is that you could save it. But if you're following the Ramah's heter to have a Jew do it, that's another shaila. It's very plausible you should not have to save it. And I hesitate to mention this, but there's another question, and there's a similar halachic question, which is if a person has excess milk and a child is not nursing, can you extract, can you pump the milk on Shabbos. And because it is very painful for humans to have milk, and for mothers to have milk. And so then there's the shaila is, can you keep that milk? But the tragic halacha is that if a person needs to pump on Shabbos, if a mother needs to pump on Shabbos, I believe the psak is they should not keep, depending on the circumstances. If there isn't a shortage of milk and it's not going to cause harm to the child, so then most likely they would be advised not to hold on to that milk, but rather to spill it out, which is
Rabbi, one more thing. What's the status of that milk again?
which milk?
If a goy milks the cow on Shabbos, we have some restriction. I thought I heard.
No,
something.
so we read the text of the Shulchan Aruch that says that you can use it after Shabbos. The goy could milk the cow, hold on to the milk, and then after Shabbos you could have hana from it. But the shaila was, again, the doctor's shaila, which was a good one. If you're following the heter of the Ramah, that says that if there is no one available, you can milk the cow yourself. Yeah. So can you save that milk? And I said my belief is that you probably couldn't. But this is a kind of shaila that I want to give you from a primary source, not just.
Today it's not so simple because they collect the milk from all kinds of farmers, then they mix it together.
Yeah. Suffice it to say, this is really it's a big shaila, but at least we got to see. Oh wow, it's late. All right, let's do a little more Gemara. But I just want to once again point out the high caliber of scholarship of this group, that we've so far we're batting a very high average of predicting the questions that we ask are big central halachic shilas that end up being discussed at length.
No, but we have a big reward. There's no way my wife's going to tell me to sweep on Shabbos anyway. That's it.
All right. So now just to remind us that we talked about sweeping and then we talked about spritzing water, and our Amemar allowed it because there was no untiled floors. Then we quoted Mark Shisha, or he said the story of Mark Shisha, Beider Rava, that finds Rav Ashi in a very uncomfortable situation because of the dust factor in the room. And he says, come on, don't you know the Brisa says that there's a trick? You can pour water by cleaning yourself, but by default, that water spreads around and brings down the dust in the room. And we quoted, and he says, lava date, which could mean two things. Rashi tells us two possible pirushim. Either I forgot about this, or he disagrees. He said, I respectfully don't agree with this heter. And because Rav Ashi doesn't agree with the heter, therefore he could not utilize a heter that he does not support. He does not believe in. But there's a final segment to this Gemara, and then we're going to move on to the next Mishnah, which is as follows. Tana. Tat. Isha chachma mirabetzas beisa b'Shabbos. A wise woman. What's an Isha chachma? Eishes talmid chacham. Oibas talmid chacham sheshama miavia. A woman who has access to halachic knowledge and wisdom could find a solution to managing their home. How? By the above mentioned trick. Rashi, roichetzes kitonia is bizavezu, the koisa is bizavezu. She could do the dishes around the house. Rinse off a bottle over here, a cup over there, a plate over there. And by moving all over the house and rinsing the dishes and letting the water fall on the floor, they can have the same effect of sprinkling water in the house. And it would be acceptable on Shabbos.
But she knows she's doing it for a purpose. I wouldn't let her get away so easily.
So this is a word we called harama. This is a kind of halachically permissible trickery. And this is what was referenced over here. Apparently this was considered, this was permitted. But now hold on, let's see the rest of the Gemara. But now that we generally paskin like Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Shimon says, Davar she'ein miskaven mutar, Rabbi Shimon says that what's important is that if you intend to do a malacha, unintended consequences are not going to cause you to not be allowed to do an activity. And when you spritz water on your floor to prevent dust, it is not your intention to fill in holes. All he wants to do is prevent dust. So if you follow like Rabbi Shimon, Shari afilu lechatchila, you can outright spritz your floors. And so here we have the Gemara quoting a brisa, which says that there is a solution to with trickery with a kunz to put water on the floor. Paskin like Rabbi Shimon, which generally speaking, it is understood that the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon. So therefore, in this instance, I shouldn't say generally, at least in this point, or in some ways, we follow Rabbi Shimon. Therefore, the Gemara says you can definitely be merabitz. You can definitely sprinkle water on the floor. There's no malacha in doing that. There's a concern, maybe a hole will be filled in. Well, that's certainly not your intent. No one is interested in filling the holes of the floor on Shabbos. You're interested in minimizing the dust and making the house more pleasant on Shabbos. This is a short little Gemara with a very loaded So now we have an interesting Tosfos that is going to further inform our sweeping question. Bahag Shari. For this reason, Tosfos says, because we're saying that we paskin like Rabbi Shimon, that melachashin, it's shaloi miskaven. If you're not miskaven to do something, we're less concerned about the unintended consequences. Therefore, Tosfos quotes that it was permitted to sweep on Shabbos too. Because why do you sweep on Shabbos? Not to fill in the holes, just to manage your dust. And therefore, Tosfos says that you're allowed to sweep on even with a proper vachidik weekday broom. But Re rejects this. Re says no. Why? Because the Gemara later on is going to say, basically, the Gemara later on, he infers that it's not so simple that you can use a regular brush on Shabbos. So let me explain to this Tosfos. The Gemara says, if you follow Rabbi Shimon, you're allowed to spritz water. So Tosfos basically asks, well, what about sweeping? You should say the same thing about sweeping. And ultimately, Tosfos concludes that no, the heter of Rabbi Shimon is exclusively about spritzing water. But when you sweep, you are absolutely, by definition, moving earth around. And so you are a lot more psik ratio. You're a lot more certain to fill in a hole when you do sweeping. Whereas spritzing some water, okay, gravity might cause some of the earth to become, thick and shift and fill in a hole. Because it's not your kavana, and because it's not a psik ratio, Tosfos seems to be saying the heter of Rabbi Shimon is, or the heter of our Gemara, based on the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, would be more for spritzing, not for sweeping. This Tosfos does not address sweeping on a tiled floor, but maybe if we'll take away some of the bite, some of the sting of sweeping, even on a dirt floor, that might explain why there's such a comfort by many of the poskim to permit sweeping on a tiled floor. This concludes, my dear friends, the Mishnah that spoke of cheese making, sweeping, and the extraction of honeycombs on Shabbos. What we're going to do with the remaining few minutes is we'll take a sneak preview of the next Mishnah, and then we'll have fun tomorrow talking about, we'll see. Any comments or questions before we continue?
Rabbi, I think that the possibility of making a hole is the greatest issue when you're pouring water on tile or stone, which never abuts 100% one next to the other. So, and that's not really addressed there. And that's a very real possibility over time.
You're talking about making a hole by removing some of the earth that's in between two stones?
No, by the water that you're cleaning with, spritzing, okay? If it's one piece of stone taking up a room, which doesn't happen. Okay, but if it's tile or stones? How big are they? 12 by 12, 16 by 16? How do they butt up one against the other? What's in between? Okay, today we use things and we have polyurethane. Okay, but in those days, there was dirt in between. Okay, and the stones moved. And in that space in between, the water would go in and over time could cause a hole to.
That's an interesting question. It doesn't seem to me that the Gemara is concerned of this, but it is something to think about. Maybe because it's very gradual, so you won't have in a single Shabbos the creation of a guma, or maybe the crack was considered minute enough that it doesn't have the halachic classification of a guma, of a little mound or hole, or not a mound, a little ditch, a little hole, a little unevenness. But it's an interesting thing to ponder. Shkoyach for bringing that up. Reb Beryl?
I'm surprised that there's no question about the broom itself historically. The broom, branches, breaking.
The Gemara doesn't ask about a broom, but some of the commentaries in the Shulchan Aruch talk about it extensively. Some of the commentaries here as well. There are certain kinds of brooms that are going to certainly be problematic if you're going to be breaking them, or if it's otherwise a prohibited substance. If you recall, we said that the opinions that say that you cannot sweep with a heavy broom might permit sweeping with something very light and fuzzy that's not going to be able to shift extensive amounts of dirt. So it is discussed. We didn't tackle it in a systematic way because the Shulchan Aruch doesn't directly discuss it, nor do the primary commentaries that we've bumped into at this point.
Rabbi,
let me ask you another question. I'm sorry, Bernie, you wanted to answer?
yeah, just a quick one, Rabbi.
Yes.
God, get rid of this. Okay.
I'm telling you, I think our theory is fairly.
Yeah. I was going to say that L comes before W in the alphabet. Maybe we could put on our list sleeping on Shabbos. I think there are a lot of issues with that are similar to the sweeping issues that are really something that we might be concerned with and involved with. And
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand. Sleeping.
I'm saying originally I thought we were talking. I didn't hear
sweeping.
About sleeping on Shabbos.
Sleeping, I got you. Yeah,
sleeping.
That could be
taking a shlef on Shabbos. And I think it's I know there are issues related to it. How much
there's a saying that says they say Shina b'Shabbos tainug.
Right.
Shena on Shabbos is tainug. So the question is, what does Shina mean? It could mean two things. It could mean study, or it could mean sleeping. In modern Hebrew, Shina means sleeping, but in the more Mishnaic Hebrew, lishnon, Shina means to study. And so they say sleeping on Shabbos is a tainug, but Torah study on Shabbos is a tainug. And then they say in the yeshiva that to sleep on a Masechet Shabbos, Shina b'Shabbos, you sleep on a Gemara Shabbos, it's a big Masechta, so it's a good padding. That's a tainug.
Now I know why.
This year.
Now
Also.
Married rabbits and Shana, so it's okay.
Rabbi, let me ask you a question.
And why our comment is going to be made by a dentist who's interested in the word as well.
Shana, Shane. I hear.
Let me ask you a question, completely out of thought. Going back to the milking. So what is the issue with milking is separating the milk out of the udder.
Yeah, taking the desirable milk out of the
squeezing of it. That is the isser, because if that is the isser, then what do you do when you have a baby's bottle and it wouldn't come out unless you squeeze it? Sometimes you have to squeeze the milk out, so it would be a similar situation.
So that's an interesting question. But the difference is that
I understand the difference. It's not a natural, this is
So ultimately it is not a problem. But it is it's an interesting question. But it's mainly basically the malacha is extracting the edible components of the in the agricultural process. It's extracting the edible from the inedible vegetation or grain. The tolda is anytime that you're extracting food in its source from the part that's not inedible. Now, the interesting thing conceptually is that by grain, the husk is inedible and it's essentially garbage. By the animal, you don't want to get rid of the udders today, because if the udders are gone today, there's no milk tomorrow. And even afterwards, there's a discussion in halacha about today I don't think you can go to the store and get udder soup or whatever. But once upon a time, I think they consumed much more of the animal, or at least they package it. Today it goes into the hot dogs, into the.
They did. It's a delicacy.
Is a delicacy. As a matter of fact, it's brought in the Gemara. I forget where now. That because the udders hold the milk, so it's the part of the animal that maybe you could imagine having basar v'chalav, because it's the fleishigs and the milk. Anyways, but in as much as you want the milk today, the udder is like a mushel. It's like the husk of the grain, and so therefore it's a tolda on the fire. But when it comes to a bottle where you placed it in there, it's not in its natural place. I don't believe that would apply. My dear friends, unfortunately we're out of time. This is an interesting discussion, and we could continue. But bli neder, tomorrow we'll cover some more ground in our actual Gemaras. But I want to again compliment our dear members of the Chabura for having a very high batting average here, as far as predicting and zooming in onto the important subjects.
High batting average on questions that have no answers.
Rabbi Beryl, you would do very good on a Stump the Rabbi challenge. All right, Dr. Pasternak, Shalom Ber today is not going to be on, I don't believe so. Just wanted to let you know that. But thank you all for being here. Wishing everyone a prosperous, healthy, good day in every sense, and look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. Be'ezer Hashem, Gesundheit and Freilichkeit. Thank you all.
Scott, thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you.